The most impact that I think that Dan Kennedy has had on the Sarasota community is the Sarasota Military Academy. The students that are coming out of there are prepared, well prepared to go into college or to go into the military, whatever they choose to do, as a result of the dedication and commitment of Mr. Kennedy and his staff.
Dan Kennedy was born in Rochester, New York on October 11, 1945, to Bernard and Lina Kennedy. He was the oldest of two boys, his brother Michael 8 years younger. His father had run away from home when he was 10 years old and became a cabin boy on an ore ship sailing the Great Lakes. Over time, he worked his way up to first mate. After 25 years, he decided to start a new life in Rochester, New York.
He first started selling appliances, and that's where he met my mom. She was the bookkeeper. And following that, they got married, and then he joined a fledgling company called IBM, and he started out as a custodian. And he used to tell me stories about how they made fun of him as a custodian in the shop. And then soon he was an assembly line worker, and then pretty soon he was a department chair, a manager, and ultimately he was in Amsterdam, Holland, in charge of engineering, setting up the brand new plant for IBM.
Dan's mother stayed at home and took care of the household and family.
My memories are wonderful of coming home from school and going out to play, and then smelling dinner being cooked, and then running home about 5:30 or so, and dinner was ready to be served, and my dad came home and we all sat around the table together and we had a family meal together, and there were wonderful, wonderful times, and I'll never forget them.
When Dan was about 8 months old, the family moved to Hughsonville, New York, near Wappingers Falls, where IBM was building a new plant. Dan soon found an affinity for the outdoors.
So I grew up in the country. I got my first rifle when I was 7 years old, and I was taught how to use it, and I was able to go out by myself and go hunting for woodchucks and squirrels and rabbits and whatever else I could plug. And I had just a wonderful time hiking the hills and mountains. My buddies and I used to camp out even in the winter when there was snow on the ground, and I just had a wonderful time living there.
In New York, Dan became active in the scouting program, starting with the Cub Scouts and then advancing through the ranks of the Boy Scouts.
I was very active in Boy Scouts in the New York area in Wappingers Falls, and my buddy and I, we were all of us together, and we were all striving to become Eagle Scouts at that time. We were pushing the merit badges and doing everything we could possibly do to rack them up.
In 1955, when Dan was in the 5th grade, his father was transferred to Lexington, Kentucky.
I had to say goodbye to my old friends, you know, in Wappingers, and make new friends in Lexington. And it was a pretty easily done because we lived in a neighborhood, and everybody that went to the school lived in the neighborhood, and I soon knew everybody, and we had a lot of fun. The only hard part for me was in Kentucky everybody played basketball, and I had never played it before in my life.
In his junior high and early high school years, Dan was an excellent student who thrived on mathematics.
In high school, 9th and 10th grade at Lexington Catholic High School, I was, I think, designated at the time the only student that got perfect 100s all the way through Algebra 1 and geometry. I loved geometry. I used to type my geometry homework and then draw the symbols in after I had typed it. And I never got a grade less than 100 in those two courses, and I did well in the other classes as well.
Dan attended Christ the King Elementary and Lexington Catholic High School.
It was pretty much a segregated situation. Boys and girls had separate classes. The girls walked on one side of the hallway and the boys walked on the other side of the hallway. Every now and then we'd pass notes back and forth too. You know, I certainly passed notes back and forth a lot.
In his junior and senior year in high school, Dan became involved in politics. He helped develop a student government. It was a valuable lesson in political challenges.
Well, the first thing was overcoming the objections of the administration. They were not in favor of having that organization in the school. For what reason, I don't know. I have that at the military academy now, and it's more of an assistance than anything else. But we proceeded on. We developed the Constitution. We voted in representatives. We had meetings. We decided on things we could do to make the school better, to make the environment for the students better. And it was working quite well when I finally graduated.
Dan ran cross country and track and was the manager of the high school basketball team. He became an entrepreneur, developing his own lawn mowing business in the summers.
My dad bought me my first lawnmower. I treated it like a car. I washed and waxed it after every lawn I cut. And there was a group down the street from where we lived. Their name was the Bryants. And they had, I think they had 10 or 11 children, and they didn't have much money at all. And I charged $2.50 to cut their grass back then. And Dad encouraged me, after I cut the grass and after I got paid, he told me I would feel better about it if I took the kids up to the drugstore and treated them all to Sundays, which I did, and he was right. And I think that was another good lesson that he taught me.
Through his hard work, he was able to purchase his first car, a 1953 Chevrolet.
My dad and I went out to look for it, and we looked at a number of cars, and we finally came across this 53 Chevy. We had low mileage and wasn't too badly beat up, but somewhat beat up. And we took it to a mechanic, and we thought we'd be smart and have every mechanical device checked out thoroughly before investing the $200, which is what it was being sold for. Everything looked to be good, so we bought the car, and that very next weekend I took all my buddies down to Harrington Lake, and we went to, the only way you can get to the place where you go swimming is down a single lane, very narrow road all the way down to the water, and there's no place to turn around, so I parked it down there. We all went out and went swimming, and we had rowboats, and we had floats, and we had picnic baskets, and we had all that stuff, and we had a great day, and we were totally exhausted, and we got back, we piled into the car for the trip home, and I got the car started, put it in reverse, and there was no reverse. And so all those guys had to push that car back up the hill in order to get home. Of course, I had to steer.
Like most of the people in Lexington, he was fascinated by the horses and the track. His dad took him to the races in hopes of teaching him the value of his money.
I think I had $27 in my pocket from my lawn mowing business, and he pointed out a couple of horses that he thought would be good bets, and I bet, and I won, and he encouraged me to bet again, which I did, and I lost everything, and I learned a valuable lesson. And I'm not a bettor now. I don't gamble at all.
As a freshman in high school, Dan met a young woman who would become the passion of his life.
I remember it in my mind's eye like it was yesterday. I saw this beautiful girl coming up the street. It was cold. She had a big winter jacket on. And I thought to myself, my goodness sakes, that is one lovely looking young lady, and I would like to get to know her and perhaps take her out on a date.
I was 12, he was 14, and I was standing there with the crossing guard at school, and he had gotten off the high school bus. It was after school, and the crossing guard introduced us because he had seen me and wanted to know who I was.
And he introduced her as Ethel, which I found out later it wasn't her name, but I thought it was for quite a while. And so I called the family and tried to ask her to go with me to different things, and her parents wouldn't let her date until she got to be 14.
Dan waited anxiously for the next 2 years to pass and tried again.
He called and said, you're in high school now, so now you can date, go out on a date. And I said, oh, absolutely. And because we had talked during the years, and so he said, well, there's a sock hop up at the church, which was in the middle of where we lived. He lived a block on one side, and I lived a couple of blocks on the other side. And he said, would you like to go to the sock hop? Well, of course. But you see, I can't car date until I'm 16.
I walked down to her house and escorted her up the street to the church, to the dance, and we had, well, she had a better time than I did because I hardly got to dance with her. She was so popular, everybody else was dancing with her. I only got, I think, 1, maybe 2 dances with her the whole evening, but I did get to walk her home, and that made it worth it.
While Tootie and Dan continued to date, Dan soon found his interest in school waning.
I discovered pool, I discovered cars, I discovered drag racing, I discovered all of those things, and I guess all the hormones and everything churning around in there too, so I was going off in the wrong direction.
He found playing hooky was more fun than sitting in class. On one such outing, he and a friend spent the day in the sun, playing round after round of golf.
Finally made it back home, and I was completely sunburned. And my mom was so upset. She said, why are you so sunburned? And thinking quickly, I said, well, Mom, we had PE outside. We had a field day today. And she said, well, I think it's terrible if they didn't protect you from the dangers of the sun. I'm going to call the school right now and let them know I'm not happy about this. And she did, and then of course she immediately found out that I had skipped. And then my dad found out about it when he got home, and there was a great consequence to pay.
Dan was able to focus on his studies enough to graduate from high school in 1965. That fall, he entered the University of Kentucky to study engineering.
That first year I was not mentally prepared for college. I did not apply myself properly, so I flunked out my first year.
He left school and took a job on the assembly line at IBM.
I had a number of pretty grueling jobs on the assembly line. Long about May of that year, I began to think that that wasn't the kind of work that I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So I wrote the university and asked them to re-enroll me. They wrote me back and said that they were declining to do that and that I should rethink my career goals.
During this time, his father was sent to Amsterdam in charge of engineering to oversee the building of a new plant for IBM. While there, he collapsed from a heart attack and died.
It took me weeks before I could go back to work. And when I went back, the first thing they did is have me clean out his office. I was just devastated.
After his father's death, Dan was even more determined to return to college. He met with numerous people at the university and finally convinced them to grant him a probationary enrollment.
So I went back, and the first semester I got a 4.0 or close to it. Got on the dean's list the first semester back. Second semester, same thing, and it went on that way all through the whole remaining 4 years.
While in college, he and Tootie continued dating and spending all their free time together. One evening, a friend asked him if he and Tootie would help out at a youth group designed for children who needed motivation in life.
The first thing we did was to start a model rocket club, because rockets were big items back then. And we taught the students how to make their rockets, how to paint them, how to sand them down, how to make them fly faster, select the motors, do all those kinds of things. The kids absolutely gobbled it up. And they began to move into the directions of actually doing some math to determine the trajectory of the rocket, or the speed, or the drag coefficient, and all that kind of stuff. It was exciting, heady stuff back then. And we were enjoying it so much that to me, it was just like a voice telling me, Dan, you should go into education. It was pretty clear to me. And so Tootie felt the same way. She was going into pre-med at the time. So we both switched out of our current majors and went into education. And here I am after being an educator for over 45 years. I still love going to work every day, and I must have made the right decision.
While Tootie and Dan were dating, they had not yet decided to marry. It was Tootie's grandmother who gave them the encouragement to tie the knot, and it all came about because of Dan's Honda 160 motorcycle.
I rode the motorcycle down there, and I parked it out in the driveway, as I always did. And her grandmother was quite the Southern lady. She was very genteel. I have just the fondest memories of her. And we could tell that she always wanted us to get married, and she was doing everything she could possibly do to steer us in that direction.
My grandmother said, oh, here, let me take a picture of you and Tootie. You'll be on the motorcycle and she can stand next to it. Because her husband, my grandfather that I never knew because he died young, also had a motorcycle, and she had a picture of him on his motorcycle with her standing behind it.
Which she quickly brought out and showed us.
So she wanted the same picture, and she took it, and she says, oh, now you can show this to your grandchildren or whatever, and just, oh my goodness, you're not even engaged. Well, then we said, oh gee, Mimi, that's what we called her. I said, you've just given us a wonderful idea.
We always said that she was the one that motivated us to go ahead and get married, and so we have that photo, and we have the photo of Tootie and I standing next to my 160 Honda.
In their junior year in college, they were engaged and married on June 3rd, 1968, at Christ the King Cathedral in Lexington, Kentucky.
That was her 21st birthday, and somehow I had this idea that if I got married on her birthday, I only need to buy one gift, all through the years. However, I'll tell you, it just simply hasn't worked out that way at all.
After a brief honeymoon, they returned to the University of Kentucky. Dan obtained a bachelor's degree in education and economics in 1968 and a master's in vocational education in 1972, both from the University of Kentucky. Dan began his teaching career in a small rural school in Paris, Kentucky, where he taught marketing and advertising.
I took over for a gentleman who retired and drove from Lexington every morning up to Paris, and they gave me the room that was in the basement. It was an actual basement room in the basement of the school with pipes and basement windows. And I think I had about 35 farm kids there, big old farm boys and farm girls. And I'm teaching them about marketing and advertising and things of that nature. And it was definitely a challenge. It was definitely a challenge. But we all got along good, and I ended up actually being friends with some of those kids as they got older, and it was a great experience.
From here, Dan returned to Lexington, to Henry Clay High School, where he taught accounting and computer programming. After teaching a couple of years, one of Dan's professors at the University of Kentucky encouraged him to become involved in the doctoral program.
So I went into the doctoral program and was there for a couple of years. Finished probably 50, 60 hours past my master's degree. And then it was time for the dissertation, and we had 2 foster kids at that time. And I just couldn't simply do another year without income. So I went back into teaching, and I never did finish my dissertation. Kind of regret it now, but water under the bridge, at this point.
Dan was an assistant professor at the University of Kentucky for a short period, and left to become assistant principal at Georgetown High in Georgetown, Kentucky.
It was very interesting. A small high school, about 1,500. The school had a tobacco base. They had their own tobacco field behind the school. So they encouraged everybody to smoke. They had smoking areas for students. Totally different environment. It's hard to believe these days. Kids came to school every day with guns, the gun rack and their pickups. It was not uncommon for a student to say, "Hey, Mr. Kennedy, I want to show you my new 45-70 lever action Marlin." And I'd go out to his pickup and he'd show it to me, and we'd work the action and comment on it. And it was not uncommon to have that kind of conversation back then.
The atmosphere brought about some unique challenges. One year during the holidays, Dan received a call that he was needed right away in the woodshop class. As the only administrator on campus at the time, he hurried right over.
I go down there and I notice there's no sound of saws or hammers or any kind of activity going on, so I go in and I see this one kid down on one knee pointing a revolver at the teacher, and he says to the teacher, "I'm going to waste you." And I said to myself, we got to get involved here. So I go over and I start talking to the kid. I knelt down with him, started talking about his life, his family, his friends, what he was about to do and all that. And he finally let the gun spin on his trigger finger, and I took it away from him. It was loaded, cocked and loaded and ready to go.
Since the 1970s, Dan has been an avid and dedicated runner, competing in several national marathons. He finds that running not only helps him physically, but also keeps his mind sharp.
I noticed that I was thinking more clearly. I was able to solve challenging problems in my life and in my work. It was relaxing, it freed me up, and I guess I just simply became addicted to running. And I've been running since 1970. I've run 12 marathons. I've run a sub-3 marathon. I run 60 miles a week now, if not a little bit more. Run twice a day, every day just about. And came up pretty much with the fleshed out concept of SMA while I was running. This particular seal for the Academy, I came up with this concept while I was running one day and came in and sketched that on the back of an envelope. And so running has been very beneficial to me. I hope I can continue for many more years.
In 1977, Dan and Tootie were looking for a change. They had their sights set on Sarasota. They were both applying for positions in education.
Fact of the matter is, she got her position down here well before I did, but we decided to make the move anyway. And in that interim, before we actually made the move, I received an offer to come down and apply for the assistant principal position at Sarasota High. And the gentleman that got that position had an earned doctorate, so they went with that guy. and they offered me the chairmanship of the business department at Sarasota High, which I took, and I enjoyed that. I think I did that for maybe 6, 8 years, something like that. And I taught computer programming, I taught accounting, I taught general business subjects. But for the most part, the last few years that I was a teacher at Sarasota High, I taught computer programming. And I absolutely loved teaching that class. It was a thrill to work with these kids, to see their minds work.
In 1982, Dan had an opportunity to return to administration as the Dean of Sarasota High School.
And at the time, the teachers strongly supported me in that endeavor, and I received that job. I was dean, which is basically assistant principal, but with a teacher's pay. You do everything an assistant principal does, except you don't get the pay. You go to all the games, you do the whole thing, you do the discipline, you do the meetings, you do all of that.
In 1992, he was offered the position of assistant principal at Riverview High School.
I had a wonderful time over there, enjoyed the faculty. Every school has its own personality, and Riverview's personality is very unique, very powerful, very, very positive. I had a great time there.
A year later, in 1993, Sarasota High asked Dan to return as their assistant principal. And then, in 1994, he was offered the position of principal.
I was given the mission at the time to improve the academic image of Sarasota High School, because at that time it was primarily an athletic school. So I endeavored to do that by improving the school, working to add programs that would build the reputation academically in the community. Resulted in the MAST program. We ultimately got an A grade from the state, and things worked out very well.
Dan was a hands-on administrator and got involved with the students. He even challenged a local boxing champion, Dave Jaco, to a match to be held during a school pep rally for the Riverview-Sarasota football game.
And he was supposed to go down in the third round in front of all the kids that night, and I accidentally got him with an uppercut that rattled him a little bit. And he didn't go down. He made me do a round 4, and it just completely exhausted me. It was unbelievable. We had a great time. It was a great skit.
At the turn of the century, Dan began to look to new horizons. He had always noticed students in his school that were involved in the ROTC program seemed to be better motivated, disciplined, and to excel. He thought, perhaps this could be a model for a full-time ROTC academy.
And it became a passion for me, and I just had to take a leap of faith and make it happen, or I would have kicked myself the rest of my life. So I invited Bert Bershon to be my partner at the time, and we started the process. The first person I hired was Jim Young, who is currently my head custodian. We went a long time without any pay, basically, and putting the framework for the school together. The district advised me about the current St. Martha's being vacated, so we contacted the diocese. Planets lined up. We ended up getting the facility on a lease option. We exercised our option in year 2 and purchased the property.
People have the misconception that a military academy is a behavioral school, that it's for troubled children, whereas his vision was total opposite. It was a school for children that wanted to excel, where other kids just wanted to get by.
At the beginning, I thought it was all about respect and having the uniform clean and being organized. And it's not about that. It's about how you carry yourself. And that's been my experience, is developing a character, a strong character, and being able to carry myself with respect and confidence.
He won't allow negative things to be the last resource. So what he does, he takes the empowerment and he uses it in such a way you don't even see it coming. It's like he catches you and you are looking at him and he's talking with you, and then the next thing you know, you're off and running and you're doing what he asks you to do without feeling any pressure. You don't feel any pressure at all. And it's so smooth the way he handles everything.
He has brought in people that he feels will make an impact on students. And the number one priority here is the student. He will tell all of us about the way that he would like to see things going, and it's real student oriented, and he wants the best education possible for these kids.
He's a dedicated and committed leader. He had a dream for Sarasota Military Academy, and he worked hard with Bert Deshawn to raise the money to be able to make that dream come to fruition. And then after he finished with the high school, then he started driving towards the middle school. He's been driven in order to supply or provide an education, a military education for the students of Sarasota County. It's just been awesome to watch him as he's reached his dreams.
Since 2002, the Sarasota Military Academy has grown to be one of the leading academic schools in the county and serves as a model for schools throughout the nation. A new charter middle school, Sarasota Military Academy Prep, is planned to open off Fruitville Road east of I-75. The high school today boasts an enrollment of over 900 students.
I think it's largely because of the talented faculty and staff that we have. I also think that Sarasota is very unique and extremely supportive of military personnel and veterans, and that patriotism runs very deep. And when our graduates leave SMA, they are fully functioning, extremely patriotic young adults. And I think that's what our community is looking for.
We asked Dan Kennedy his advice for those who follow.
The first thing I would say is find a career that you enjoy so that you don't dread going to work every day. You won't be successful doing something you don't like to do. And even if you have to change careers a few times, go ahead and change, explore, seek and find until you're comfortable in your role. And then I think it's extremely important to give back to society in some manner, whether it's volunteering in the hospital or in a school or financially assisting organizations. Giving back makes your life fuller and richer. Tootie and I have a couple of charities that we support and we find that extremely rewarding. And I enjoy supporting the school, and I enjoy supporting young people today, and believing in young people, I think, is something that's very important to everyone in the future. Just because a student makes a mistake or two doesn't mean that they're doomed as a human being for the rest of their lives. They have great potential. That potential needs to be tapped, needs to be guided, needs to be channeled, and the results will be incredibly positive.